Good morning, everyone. Please trust me as we begin today's chapel with a reflection exercise. Close your eyes and sit comfortably with your hands relaxed on your lap. Take a deep breath and then exhale. Listen with your heart free and your mind open. Imagine that you are a refugee. That is likely something very difficult to imagine for most of us. In fact, maybe we cannot even think about what that might look like. For starters, imagine your hometown. The place that your family has lived in for generations has been destroyed. Imagine your government, when faced with opposition demands, has deployed your national military against your fellow citizens, shooting those it saw as a threat to its hold on power. Imagine that opposition groups took to arms too, and that a violent civil war erupted. Imagine that after years of fighting, over 250,000 of your fellow citizens have died in the conflict, most of them ordinary people. Imagine that over 4 million people have fled your small country. Imagine that some of these people that have been killed or displaced are your family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. Imagine that you're trapped in this civil war that involves the use of artillery, poison gas, torture, and murder against one another. Imagine that you and your family members no longer have jobs, incomes, secure food supply, medical care, schools, or a supply chain to provide many other necessities of life. Take another deep breath and exhale, keeping your eyes closed. Imagine the smell of burning all around you. Imagine the booming sounds of bombs and guns blasting around you as the shrieking and screams of people around you ring in your ears. Imagine the sights of everything around you destroyed into rubble. What images come to your mind? What feelings emerge inside of you? Or does it still feel impossible for you to imagine? Take another deep breath in and exhale. You may now open your eyes.
Blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only
Over many decades, Canada has welcomed countless displaced and persecuted people in the need of protection, security, and an opportunity to rebuild their lives. Many would argue that this country of Canada was built and changed for the better by refugees. This was true nearly 2 centuries ago when Ireland's potato famine and land clearances in the Scottish Highlands forced more than 1 million people to our shores. Sadly, like many Syrians today, many of those Irish died from sinking ships, disease, and starvation along the way. We've had Ukrainians who at the beginning of the 20th century planted the wheat that turned the prairies into one of the world's greatest breadbaskets. 60 years ago, when Canada admitted 37,000 Hungarian refugees fleeing the invasion of their country by Soviet forces, the newcomers brought with them a whole forestry school to the University of British Columbia that helped improve their forestry practices. A decade later, it was the turn of the Vietnamese boat people fleeing the fall of Saigon to communist forces. The more than 100,000 Vietnamese who came here have succeeded on so many fronts. Canadians all across the country have said we must do more to help Syrian refugees, victims of the worst refugee crisis in decades. It has been heartwarming to see Canada respond to this desperate situation. In fact, this past Monday marked a significant milestone with the arrival of the targeted number of 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada. Not only has the government made commitments to welcome refugees into our great country, but so have everyday Canadians. In fact, every day I hear stories that describe the outpouring of support from Canadians across the land to privately and publicly help Syrian refugees in any way that they can. In the short run, this is a humanitarian act. In the medium term, an influx of Syrian refugees will help to build a stronger Canada, as was the case with earlier waves of refugees into this country. Of course, there will be short-term costs, but there will be many, many more long-term gains. History has shown us that those who have come to Canada as refugees in the past have ended up making tremendous contributions to our society, our cultural life, and our economy. There's many wonderful examples. Our recent Governor Generals, Adrienne Clarkson and Michaëlle Jean, are just 2 of them. These examples are people who have returned Canada's generosity in ways that are simply priceless. I admit I'm truly proud to be Canadian, as I shared with so many of you earlier this year in my chapel speech. As I learn about Canada's history with helping others, as I educate myself on Canada's efforts with the current refugee crisis, and as I work with the Appleby community to support the Elsa Cren family's transition to Canada, I could not be more proud to be Canadian and to be part of the Appleby community. In fact, every day I witness how important it is for each one of us to welcome refugees, not just into Canada, but into our own lives. I truly believe that their successful resettlement and integration has and will be key to our country's history and to each of our own history. Today, as we reflect on the challenging journey that refugees experience, I encourage each of you to let your heart and your mind feel the emotions that come to you. Walking a mile in one's shoes is one way to support them, as it is all part of being empathetic. While we can never truly feel what they have been through, it is important for us to be aware and educated. Use the feelings and emotions that enter you to create this chance of awareness and that desire to make a change. I hope you can join hands to build a world in which less people will be forced to flee and in which refugees are protected until they can return home safely. I hope you can challenge yourself and others to ensure that ears will no longer turn deaf to the voices of people in need, that eyes will see a moment of grace instead of threat, that tongues will not be silenced but will advocate, and that hands will reach out working for peace and justice for all everywhere in this world.
Please close your eyes. Take a deep breath and then exhale. Now imagine you hear that there are countries far away, but reachable. You have heard they are willing to take you and your family in. What would you do? Perhaps you feel you have no choice. You have to flee the chaos, violent and life-threatening war around you. Where do you go? How do you get there? You don't want to leave your home, but you really feel as though you have no other choice. Another winter is only a few months away. That will only make it harder to survive. You don't want your children to be that cold ever again. Take a deep breath in and then exhale. How do you feel as you reflect on this difficult decision that you must make? Can you feel it in the pit of your stomach? Is there turmoil and chaos inside of you as you think about this choice? Now imagine, you've heard a place called Canada that will take you in. Never been there, never been anywhere near there. You have no idea what it might be like. So you set out. You pack up whatever you can reasonably carry, a few clothes, maybe a few mementos, whatever cash, food, and water you may have, and you put on the best pair of shoes you own. You do this because you have to start walking. Where are you walking to? You don't really know. How far is it? You're not sure. Or maybe you'd rather not know. You do realize that you cannot walk to Canada, where you want to go, but you try to get to a place where you have heard, and they might give you help. A place that might lead you to Canada. Take another deep breath in, and then exhale. How did the sights, sounds, and smells hit you now? Can you visualize how scared your family is, but how brave everyone is trying to be? How do you say goodbye to all that you have known? How do you keep hope alive when you know it is to be a long and difficult journey?
The villagers in Bu huddled at a local hall, awaiting the carriers of a modern plague that had scourged the landscape throughout northern Nigeria, with mass murder, rape, and kidnappings. As members of Boko Haram approached, the only sounds that could be heard were murmured, soft-spoken invocations to Allah and to Jesus for help. We had been told that the terror group was only 10 kilometers away, Muhammad Tijani recalled. We didn't know what to do, where to run to, just a few able men and bows and arrows. And so they prayed, Muslims and Christians together. Terror and fear know no religious boundaries in the refugee crisis, gripping large areas of the world. In Myanmar, tens of thousands of Rohingya Muslims have been forced into refugee camps by extremists who are Buddhist. No civilian is safe in the bloody civil war in Syria, where members of different Muslim and Christian sects have all found themselves forced to flee their homelands. And in Nigeria, where the number of internally displaced persons has reached 1.5 million by some estimates. Muslims and Christians also fill refugee camps across the border in Chad and Cameroon. Many nations in Europe, complicit in some of the 20th century's bloodiest crimes, from the Holocaust to the ethnic cleansing of the Balkan Wars to the Armenian genocide, face their own crises of conscience as new generations of refugees seek sanctuary within their borders. Belief systems are often invoked by terrorists to legitimize their cause. But take away the cries of extremists who turn upside down the shared values of global religions to welcome the refugee, faith has a critical role to play in addressing the refugee crisis. Faith has been found to help sustain the mental and physical health of the refugees on their harrowing journey. Religious communities also have the ability to influence the moral culture of individual nations. At their best, religious communities have been major sources of international aid and individual comfort to international refugees.
Please stand for the following prayer. Gracious God, we join our cries today with the people of Syria. who have seen too much violence, who have seen too much war, who have seen too much displacement, who have seen too much mourning, and have borne far too great a burden. We cry out for peace. We cry out for stability. We cry out for healing. We cry out for neighbors living as neighbors as we are meant to live. For whether we call ourselves Christian or Muslim, Sunni or Shiite, Jew or Arab, whatever the name, when we take up arms against our neighbor, when we curse our neighbor, even when we so much as turn from our neighbor, we shame ourselves before you. So, we turn in prayer toward our neighbors in Syria in their greatest time of need. In solidarity with these sisters and brothers, we cry out to you. Let there be joy where there is mourning. Let there be hope where there is fear. Let there be stillness where there is violence. And let there be peace, a just and lasting peace. Lord, your grace abounds. May it rest upon the people of Syria and other lands, today and always. Please remain standing to sing the hymn 572.
Please close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and then exhale. Now, imagine that long walk. You don't know others walking along the way, and you don't speak the same languages as about half the people you encounter. Where do you sleep? Where are the bathrooms? Where do you get food and water? How do you clean your body and your clothes? You have 5, 10, or maybe $20 a day with which to make this journey. But that's for you and your family. Imagine you arrive in a foreign country. Police are there to meet you. The police you're used to back in your hometown beat people and arrest people without any justification. Sometimes they kill their enemies. Here in this new place, the police herd you into compounds, empty buildings, and fenced-in spaces. Some other people in uniform give you some bottles of water and a few sandwiches. but you also see the crowds of locals. They're looking angry and hostile. You hear a few of them shouting angrily at you. Other refugees have heard the government here wishes you would go away, but they won't let you go either. Their rules say that you have to register yourself as a refugee here, but you don't understand the paperwork, and you've heard this means you won't be able to go on to Canada yet. How will you feel? Do you feel traumatized, rejected, exhausted, filthy, hopeless, abandoned, confused, and angry? You most likely do. After all, you're human just like anyone else. Take another deep breath in and then exhale. Imagine sitting with your family in a small tent. Each day feels like an eternity as your stomach grows and your mouth is dry from the lack of food and water. Each day feels like a lifetime as you wonder if you will ever get the opportunity to work and go to school ever again. Each day feels like forever as you wonder how long you can survive like this. Each day feels like it might be the last because you're scared. The fear inside of you is so intense, yet you continue to find inner strength and courage to carry on for the next day.
A reading from the Quran, Surah 59, verse 9. And those who before them have settled in the homeland and accepted faith, they love those who emigrated to them and find no hesitation in their hearts in helping them. They give them priority over themselves, even if they themselves are needy. Whoever is protected from his natural greed, it is they who are the successful.
Please bow your heads for the following Islamic prayer for peace. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Praise be to the Lord of the universe, who has created us and made us into tribes and nations, that we may know each other, not that we may despise each other. If the enemy incline towards peace, do thou also incline towards peace. And trust God, for the Lord is the one that heareth and knoweth all things. And the servants of God, most gracious are those who walk on the earth in humility. And when we address them, we say, peace.
Last Friday, I just stood right here and talked to you about growth, and that growth required strength and support. Bailey girls shared so many stories and lessons with you last week. As Ms. Single mentioned earlier, Vietnamese people are amongst the many refugees that have been received by Canada. For those of you who don't know, the Vietnam War took place from 1955 to 1975. Between 1975 and 1995, about 2 million Vietnamese people fled the country after the communist government took over. Inspired by our prefix theme for this year of What is Your Story? Today, Ms. Nguyen and I are here to tell you of our stories about how 2 little refugee girls grew up.
My story begins with my parents, Nam and Hoa, a newly married young couple trying to figure out their prospects in the post-Vietnam War era. As the newly formed communist government imposes new policies and laws, my father, a French and literature teacher, was beginning to feel the tight hold the government had on what he was and wasn't allowed to teach in his classrooms. My mother, as any mother would, wanted the best for my older sister and me, and knew that by staying there, we would not have the freedom to grow up happy. There we were closely monitored and restricted in everything we did, from midnight curfews to requiring government-issued papers to visit another city. Imagine not being able to visit a family member or a friend in Toronto unless you were given written permission from the government. So when they heard rumors of late-night boats leaving the country, they decided that this was how they would leave their beloved home country for a better future.
My story begins a little bit earlier than Miss Nguyen's, since my parents got married in the midst of the war, and both my younger brother and I were born during the war. My father was a pilot in the South Vietnamese Army. He flew supplies or soldiers that would then get parachuted into battlefields. On April 30th, 1975, Saigon was taken by the communists. My father was sitting in his airplane and only had a few short minutes to make a decision about our lives. If he takes off on that plane, as many of his colleagues did, and flew as far as he could with the amount of fuel that he had left, he would escape the horror that awaits. But he decided to stay because he was scared that he would never be able to find us again, and he was also scared of what might happen to us without him. So, more scared about losing his family than the pain and suffering that he will have to endure. So they captured him and took him to a concentration camp. For 3 years, my brother and I did not see him because going to visit him was far too dangerous for little children. His mother, my grandmother, caught malaria during one of those tedious trips to the concentration camp to visit him, and eventually she died from it. After 3 years, he was considered rehabilitated, and so he was allowed to move to a concentration camp that was a little bit more open, closer to the city, so my brother and I were finally allowed to visit. 2 years later, he was allowed to come home. Needless to say, my father was not really rehabilitated. It would not have been safe for us to stay because we were constantly being watched, like Ms. Nguyen said. And if any one of us in the family does anything suspicious, like having a healthy, fresh piece of steak for lunch, we would get reported. Just like all parents of the refugee families that come to Canada, just like Ahmed and Samira, Miss Wynn's parents and my parents wanted a safer life for us. Just like your own parents who want you to have a better and a safer life too. I was lucky that one of my uncles had been studying in a boarding school in Belgium since the 1960s. So he had a guardian, an older couple, Mammy and Papi, I used to call them. Mammy and Papi sponsored our family in 1981. They helped us fly from Saigon to Brussels. They picked us up at the airport, and they gave us an apartment to live in. They owned the building where we lived, so they gave my mom the superintendent job there.
My family was not as lucky on our plight out of Vietnam. After several failed attempts on getting on one of those fishing boats, including at least 2 attempts which resulted in my mother and my 4-year-old older sister being put into prison, we had one sort of lucky break. One evening, my family sneaked into a fishing village just south of the Saigon capital. My father, sister, and a paid guide stayed in one stranger's house, while my mother and another guide carried me, a 6-month-old baby, into another stranger's house. They had paid the 2 guides and the strangers all the money they had to hide in their house for one night. Before dawn, the one guide took my father and sister to a beach to catch a small wooden fishing boat that would take us to Indonesia. They made it safely on the boat and waited for my mother and I to arrive. However, my mother's guide felt that she was too slow carrying me and left her to fall behind, get lost, and get caught by the local police. Although it was a small boat, it was crammed with 35 other people, so that by the time my father realized that we were not on the boat, it was too late. He would not see either of us for another 4 years. After 10 days and 10 nights in the South China Sea, surviving hunger, dehydration, and a pirate raid, they reached Indonesia, claimed refugee status, and were put on the small refugee camp island of Galong. Meanwhile, my mother and I were put into prison, and although I was allowed out the next day, my mother was kept in there for another 3 months. It took another year after that before my mother was able to get us out of the country. I was just under 2 years old, the age of Sabrine, the youngest daughter that the Appleby community is sponsoring, when we left. We rented a car and took it to the Vietnam-Cambodia border. We snuck across the border, did an underground trek to an unknown beach, waded over to a fishing boat that then took us to Thailand. This trek took us months to complete, and it was too dangerous for us to even write a letter to our family to let them know that we were okay. There, in a small town outside Bangkok, we settled into a refugee camp in Chonburi. Imagine that for months, none of our family or friends knew if we made it, or were captured by the police, or had even died. My family's path out of a war-torn country is just one of millions over the years. The UN High Commission for Refugees estimated that between 200 to 400,000 Vietnamese boat people died leaving that country. We were one of the lucky ones. Currently, there are 4.6 million Syrian refugees and another 6.6 million displaced within Syria. So you can imagine that many of those people will be undergoing a difficult and dangerous journey in the hopes of freedom today. Even when refugees arrive in a camp, life can be difficult. Adapting to a strange, temporary environment with only the clothes you wore when you left, and maybe a small bag of your belongings, can be very challenging. With hundreds of refugees crammed in small tents or poorly constructed wooden houses, no bigger than a pew that my mother and I were given a small newspaper-covered room no bigger than half of a pew that you're sitting on right now. And that was to be our room in Thailand for over a year. We slept on a hammock and portioned the food that came to us from the UNHCR truck that came about once a week. My father and sister were given mats on a wooden floor in a large communal sleeping area and would fish to help increase the food that they were given in Indonesia. The whole time we were in these camps, delegations from different countries came to interview and possibly sponsor families to their countries. Fortunately, my father's ability to speak French enticed the Canadian government to sponsor him and my sister to Canada. And from there, the settlement worker on their case was able to put them up in the Halton Hotel in downtown Oakville back in 1987. When he arrived in Canada, he searched for my mother and I, as he had not heard from us in months, as we were lost in Cambodia. When he finally got word from us that we arrived in Thailand safely, it took another year before he was able to sponsor my mother and I to Canada. It had been years since we'd seen each other, and I remember that the first time I saw him, I was thinking to myself, who is this strange man with a scruffy beard hugging my mom and I when we arrived? I had not seen him since I was 6 months old, and by then I was almost 4. Imagine all your life you've lived in a tropical climate. Then after what seemed like days of flights and airports, you arrive in Canada in February of 1987 to Oakville. The weather at that time is kind of like it is now, with lots of snow. When my father and sister arrived in shorts and t-shirts, they were shocked to see this white fluff everywhere. Settling into Canada was not as easy as it is now. Now, as I spend time researching information for our sponsor family, so much has changed since my family's settlement. First, we had no internet back then. So you had to go to the service buildings and hope that they were opened, hope that you had all the required documents, and hope that you were able to get an appointment that day. Acquiring things like a health card and registering for English classes took weeks or even months, sometimes at that pace. Luckily, the settlement worker who assigned my father to Oakville knew of a wonderful couple who has helped refugees in the past. He called up Fred and Esther Wheeler. They showed up at my dad's hotel room, and from that day forward, they were immediate friends. This loving and wonderful couple guided my father through the Canadian culture, helped him put my sister into the Oakwood Elementary School, the same ones the Alsacan girls are in. They gave him comfort when he toiled over searching for his lost wife and daughter. They provided what our Hope group is helping the Alsacan family with in terms of settlement. Fred and Esther Wheeler. They were here earlier, and I had the chance to tell them that words could not describe the love I have for them as another set of grandparents. They have always been there for my family since day one. On behalf of my family, I couldn't thank them enough for the love and support their family has given to us. And it's because of them that I did not hesitate when I heard about Mr. Thompson's plan of sponsoring a Syrian family to Canada. They were my inspiration.
I was about the same age as the twin girls from the family that we have sponsored when I arrived in Belgium. The girls started school last Monday, and I was thinking about them the whole day. I was hoping for them to have a memorable first day of school in Canada. Hopefully, they would have the same kind of day that I had 35 years ago. I did not know any French at all on that first day. It was late January, so it was very cold. I came to school wearing fluffy slippers that Mammy and Pappy had given me. They seemed warm, so I thought maybe that's what kids wear to school. That was just one example of how clueless I was. Everything was so strange. I had no idea what people were saying to me. There was not a single person in the whole school who knew Vietnamese. But on that day, I met Muriel. She was from a wealthy family. She always came to school in pretty dresses and with her long blonde hair in braids, with hair clips that matched her dress. She just looked like a little doll to me. I was wearing all sorts of mismatched clothes that people had just given to me. I had a really bad haircut, and I was so skinny because I barely had anything to eat in Vietnam. To this day, I still cannot understand why that little girl, who seems so different from me, decided that she was going to make me feel welcome. She didn't look at me and saw how different I looked. And she didn't worry that I could not understand what she was saying to me or that she could not understand what I was saying to her. She just saw the opportunity to make a new friend. She was 7 years old. She wasn't thinking about helping others or service hours or how this would look on her university application. She just wanted to make a new friend. Many of you have been in a situation similar to mine if you are an international student who spoke little English when you first came to Canada. So you know what refugees have to go through. Many of you might have been in a situation similar to my friends. You have met newcomers. It is up to you to decide that you would take a chance and try to make a new friend. How could I ever pay back Muriel for what she has done for me when we were little girls? That is not possible. So I must pay it forward instead. About 8 years later, I was starting to feel somewhat at home in Brussels. But the Belgian economic situation did not look very promising. So my parents thought we would have a better future in Canada because we had family in Canada as well. They thought learning English would not be as hard as learning French, right? I mean, no figuring out if you should use auxiliaire être or auxiliaire avoir, no random words that are somehow féminin and other words that are somehow masculin. As long as there's un toit sur la maison, any place can become a home for us, according to my dad, because we had freedom, safety, and we had each other. So I came to Canada when I was about my son Brandon's age, who's in upper 2, and I learned English and made this place become home.
Miss Chow and I went through different and yet similar journeys to get to where we are today. As refugees, you leave your beloved home country not by choice, but because circumstances cause you to leave, because the place you once called home has been destroyed in one way or another. You do not feel safe, and you worry about the future of your family. Our parents, like Ahmad and Samir, were selfless and underwent a perilous journey to ensure that their children can grow up in a free country and have a better future. And it's because of their loving acts, Ms. Chow and I were able to have a great education, get married, have wonderful children, and amazing jobs. If you ask your parents what their goals are for you, these are similar goals. Hence why we are all here today at school. These are similar goals that Hamad and Samir hope for their children as well. Since landing in Canada, Hamad has told us that he wants to ensure that the kids go to school. And we're happy to say that today, that is exactly where the kids are. They're in school, getting a good education. As Ms. Chow and I, alongside the rest of the Appleby community, help settle this new family into Canada, we think back to our experiences and the people like Mirel, Fred, and Esther as our inspiration for what we do. We hope that as you sit and listen to our story, that you would be inspired to be that support like Fred and Esther, or that friend like Mirel, to the Alsacran family. Helping others can have an exponential effect. Of course, a math and science teacher had to include some geeky insert about exponential function. We had to lighten the mood. We were each helped by one sponsor who thought that they were just helping a small family of 4 people. But we, the children, grew up and had families of our own, and now we're both involved in helping this Syrian family. So from 1 to 2 to 4 to 16 and so forth, as exponential functions do, we hope that we've inspired you to be kind to a person in need, because you never know the impact of a small gesture, like a helping hand or a friendly playtime, can have on someone who's gone through a past like we have. Everyone here has the potential to be that someone to people like the El family. Just remember that small acts of kindness can have a huge impact on people's lives without you ever knowing it.
Please close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and then exhale for this final reflection. Imagine waiting at Gate 6 of the International Departures Terminal. Would you be able to express your feelings of happiness and joy? Or would you be focused on your nerves and jitters about the unknown? It is a big step to be getting on an airplane for the first time. It is a big step to be leaving everything you know behind. It is a big step. As you sit in your seat and the airplane takes off, imagine the feelings and thoughts going through your body and mind. It is all so very overwhelming that you hold the hands of your family members tightly. There is an intense feeling of hope. Hope is a magical word. Fast forward to having arrived in Canada 3 weeks ago. In the past 3 weeks, you and your family members have met many new people. You've been introduced to a whole new way of living, tried new foods, and experienced the bitter cold winds of Canada. Imagine your hands covering your face as you walk to and from school for the first time in your life. Imagine how going to school would feel when you only know 3 words of English. Just imagine. Hope is a magical word filled with many emotions. Hope is feeling that you have a chance to be safe and to live. Hope is possible when we keep our hearts and minds open. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. Keeping your eyes closed, take another deep breath in and exhale. Imagine what hope feels like after all you have experienced already in your life. Hope.
Please bow your head for the closing prayer. A Hindu prayer for peace. O God, lead us from the unreal to the real. O God, lead us from the darkness to the light. O God, lead us from death to immortality. Shanti, 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 unto all. O Lord God Almighty, may there be peace in celestial regions. May there be peace on earth. May the waters be appeasing. May the herbs be wholesome. And may the trees and plants bring peace to all. May all beneficent beings bring peace to us. May thy Vedic law propagate peace all through the world. May things be a source of peace to us, and may thy peace itself bestow peace on all. And may that peace come to me also. Om Shanti, Shanti Om.
Before the blessing, what I would like to do is say thank you. The only problem with saying thank you is that what I would do is we'd end up being here for another half an hour if I would thank all the amazing people, including everybody in this building, that have done so much for the El family. 3 weeks ago, when they arrived, was also the start of the Christian season of Lent. And Lent is designed to be a journey of growth, self-reflection, and self-discovery. And I can say, in my own experience, and in the little ways in which I've been a part of this amazing experience of sponsoring the family, I've learned a lot myself about the incredible generosity of human beings, about the incredible generosity of the school and of this community. It is a privilege and an honor to be a part of this. It is such an amazing place. So I think I'll leave the thank you as a thank you to you all. In the Bible, when as a Christian, as a priest, one of the questions that always comes up about is the Bible and what's to be believed about the Bible, and people make comments about how self-contradictory it is and some of the horrible things that are in it. There's one consistent theme that comes through in the Bible. 2,000 passages in one form or another talk about the need, the imperative of us to care for those that are vulnerable, those that are in need, those that need our help. 2,000 passages. That is the one true consistency in the Bible. It's the one call from God has for us as human beings to help those in need. And that is what we are doing, but it's only just a start. There's a long road ahead for the El Sacran family, and there's going to be a lot more need after that as well. So we have to keep continuing doing what we are doing. One of my favorite phrases is to recognize that we are the hands and feet of God in this world. Our job is to do God's love. So would you please stand for the blessing? Go forth into this world recognizing that you are the hands and feet of God. Go forth into this world and do God's love. And the blessing of God Almighty, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer be with you this day and forevermore. Amen.